Hello, listeners. Welcome to PMHN Podcast dedicated to psychiatric mental health nurse practitioners, new and old hands. This episode explains genetic inheritance patterns, risk assessment, and the role of genetic counseling in mental health. It describes basic genetic terms, population genetic studies, and the heritability of psychiatric disorders. The text highlights the influence of both genes and environment on disease, gene expression, and the growing role of pharmacogenomics in medication management and personalized medicine. I'm your host, James, and joining me is Dr. Taylor, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and educator. Let's kick off today's episode with something everyone can relate to: family stories. But in genetics, tracing your family history isn't just about fun anecdotes. It actually starts with your current family and then works back through the generations, all the way to your grandparents. Let's start simple. Why is family history such a cornerstone in psychiatry?
Absolutely. Because it's the first genetic screening tool we have, family history starts with the immediate family and extends back to grandparents. And what fascinates me is how this timeline isn't just for nostalgia. Family history is honestly a goldmine for predicting risk. By tracking things like who had what illness, or even how relatives are related, we can estimate the likelihood of certain brain or mental health conditions showing up again. When you map out which relatives had particular conditions, it can reveal important patterns about inherited risks, which often isn't obvious until you lay it all out. When we chart this information using a pedigree, we can see patterns across generations. Pedigrees use standardized symbols to represent males, females, marriages, divorces, adoptions, twins, and even consanguinity. These symbols help clinicians quickly recognize inheritance patterns.
It's wild how something as simple as a family tree can double as a medical tool. Seeing which patterns skip generations or repeat themselves really makes you look at those holiday dinners a little differently.
Exactly. And it's so valuable that the U.S. Surgeon General recommends every family keep track of its health history. The gene tells us who's related, where the risk might come from, and help doctors make more informed decisions. Understanding genetics allows clinicians to personalize care, anticipate complications, and guide preventive strategies. Suddenly, Aunt Linda's stories about the family heart aren't just folklore, they can be clues for your own health. And that takes us to how exactly those patterns show up in different types of inherited conditions.
So, let's jump into the types of genetic inheritance. I keep hearing about autosomal dominant and recessive conditions, but what's the real difference there? What kinds of inheritance patterns might a psychiatric nurse practitioner look for?
Great question. An autosomal dominant condition means just one copy of a faulty gene is enough to show up, so you might see it in multiple generations of a family. Think Marfan syndrome. If one parent has it, there's up to a 50% chance their child will too.
That's a pretty big chance. But recessive conditions seem sneakier, right?
Exactly, they hide out. Both parents have to carry a copy of the gene, but they might not have symptoms themselves. If both pass it on, like with cystic fibrosis or hemochromatosis, then the child is affected. It can look like it appears out of nowhere in a family. So, identifying the pattern can help predict risks for family members. It makes risk assessment more precise and helps guide counseling.
That's so interesting. But then there's also X-linked disorders, which always trip people up. What's different about them?
What makes X-linked disorders unique is that the faulty gene sits on the X chromosome. So, for example, Fragile X syndrome or colorblindness often shows up in males because they only have one X chromosome, no backup copy to mask the faulty gene.
I've always found that fascinating, so risk really depends on your family's inheritance patterns and which chromosomes are involved. Is that why some people get recommended genetic counseling?
Absolutely, and risk is often described in percentages based on these patterns. If you're planning a family or worried about a condition, genetic counseling can help you understand the chances and implications for relatives.
Genetic counseling sounds like it's about way more than just getting facts. What actually happens when someone sees a genetic counselor?
It's a lot more personal than people think. It's really about communication and support. A genetic counselor explains risks, reviews, testing options, and helps clients understand what the results mean for themselves and their families. It's a real conversation. Counselors help you make sense of your risks, talk you through what testing can reveal, and support you emotionally. They're there to guide you, not just drop data.
That sounds reassuring, especially if you're facing big decisions, like starting a family. I imagine some people get referred for counseling when they're just trying to plan ahead.
Yes, especially if there's a known family history or someone is worried about passing something on. It's especially important for clients planning a pregnancy or worried about passing on a condition. The counselor helps clarify what's at stake and what options exist, so it's empowering rather than overwhelming.
But genes don't tell the whole story, right? The science behind all of this can sound like alphabet soup, chromosomes, DNA, genes. Can you break down what each really means?
Right. Most psychiatric conditions are multifactorial, caused by both genes and environment. Genetics may increase vulnerability, but factors like prenatal health, nutrition, stress, trauma, and toxins can determine whether a condition actually develops. Let's start from the top. Chromosomes are the packages of DNA in each cell's nucleus. Humans have 46 organized into 23 pairs. DNA is that famous double helix made of sugar and 4 nucleotide bases, A, T, C, and G. These bases pair up A with T, G with C to form the rungs of the ladder.
I love that visual. Nature and nurture are always intertwined. So, where do genes fit into this whole picture?
Genes are like instructions written along the DNA. Think of genes as the blueprint, but the environment as the builder who decides how that blueprint takes shape. Each gene tells your body how to make a specific protein, and those proteins build and run almost everything in your body. Mess with the instructions, and you might get changes in traits or even diseases.
Speaking of instructions, what about messenger RNA and the Human Genome Project? How do they tie into the genetics story?
So, messenger RNA, or mRNA, acts like a courier. It copies the gene's instructions and delivers them to the cell machinery that makes proteins. And the Human Genome Project, that was huge. It mapped out all the DNA in humans by 2003, like compiling the ultimate genetic instruction manual.
That's incredible. Having the whole genome mapped out must have changed medicine. I keep hearing about things like gene therapy and personalized medicine now.
Totally! Gene therapy aims to replace faulty genes with healthy ones, potentially treating diseases at their root. And personalized medicine, that's all about tailoring treatments to your unique genetic profile, which is becoming more common in healthcare.
Earlier, you talked about finding patterns in families. How do scientists actually study genetic risk for mental health disorders?
They use a few clever methods. Family studies look at how often a disorder pops up in close and more distant relatives. Twin studies compare identical and fraternal twins to see if genetics or environment is more important. Adoption studies go one step further. They see what happens when kids grow up away from their biological family.
That's so smart. And what have they found with psychiatric disorders? Are genes a big factor?
For many, yes. Some disorders show up to 90% heritability, meaning genes play a big role, though the environment still matters a lot. It's rarely one gene or one cause, it's a mix.
That actually reminds me of something I read about how genes and the environment sort of team up in disease risk. Can you unpack that a little?
Definitely think of it as a partnership. Your genes might make you more vulnerable, but environmental factors like prenatal stress, infections, or even something like poor nutrition can tip the scales. Most diseases aren't just genetic or just environmental, but a combination.
I love that image. A combination lock, where both sets of numbers have to click. So even if you have the risky genes, your environment can still make a difference.
Exactly. And two people with the same genes might have totally different outcomes, depending on what they're exposed to. That's why prevention and lifestyle matter too.
Shifting gears a bit, why do some people with a risky gene get sick and others don't? What's behind that variability?
It's all about things like gene expression and penetrance. Sometimes a gene is there, but it's not switched on fully. This is reduced penetrance. You might also hear about variable expression, meaning even among people who get a disease, the way it shows up can be really different.
That's fascinating. And what about single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs? They sound complicated.
SNPs are just tiny changes in the DNA sequence, one letter switched. They can have a big impact though, sometimes changing how a gene works and affecting your risk of disease or how you respond to medications.
Funny you mentioned medication response. That field's really exploding, right? I want to touch on pharmacogenomics. How does this influence psychiatry? What does it actually mean for people?
It's all about how your genes affect the way your body breaks down drugs. Pharmacogenomics studies how genes affect drug metabolism. For example, certain gene variants like CYP4000 502D6 or CYP 4502C19 influence how fast someone processes antidepressants or antipsychotics. Some people metabolize medications super fast, others really slowly. That can mean a drug doesn't work, or it causes side effects, even at standard doses. This means two patients on the same medication may have very different responses.
So, is genetic testing for medication response becoming routine?
It's getting there, especially for certain drugs. For example, before prescribing carbamazepine, a seizure medication, the FDA requires testing for a specific gene variant, HLA-B, 1502 in people of Asian descent. It helps prevent serious reactions, like Stevens-Johnson syndrome.
It's amazing to think we're moving toward this era where your treatment really is as unique as your DNA. So this is where personalized medicine comes in?
It's such an exciting time. The more we learn, the more healthcare can move from one-size-fits-all to truly personal. Instead of trial and error prescribing, clinicians can use genetic testing to guide medication choice and dosage, improving outcomes and safety. That gives people safer, more effective options, which is really the whole point of all this genetic detective work. Thank you for joining us. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in to the PMHN Podcast, where we bring clinical insights straight to your ears. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode.